I'm Franklin, London, 1949. They said you can't be convicted of murder if there's no body. One man took that literally. London in the mid-1940s was a city of grit, scars, and shadows. The Blitz had left the streets jagged with ruins, and in the post-war haze, people were used to things, and neighbors, simply vanishing. It was the perfect environment for a man who understood that in a world filled with chaos, a polished exterior was the ultimate camouflage. George Haigh was a man of impeccable presentation. He resided at the Onslow Court Hotel in South Kensington, a place of red carpets, hushed conversations, and elderly aristocrats. To the hotel staff and residents, Haigh was a charming, somewhat successful engineer and businessman. He was a man who hummed operatic arias while adjusting his silk tie in the lobby mirror. But behind the sharp suits and the well-trimmed mustache lay the mind of a predator who saw human beings as nothing more than chemical equations waiting to be solved. The philosophy of the void. Haigh's childhood had been spent under the oppressive shadow of the Plymouth Brethren, a strict religious sect. He grew up in a world of thou shalt nots, haunted by recurring nightmares of bleeding trees and a thirst for blood. By the time he reached adulthood, he had rejected the faith but kept the discipline, applying it to the art of the con. He had spent time in prison for fraud, and it was behind bars that he had his eureka moment. He began to study the law and chemistry with obsessive focus. He became fascinated by the Latin term corpus delicti. In his twisted logic, he interpreted the body of the crime as the literal, physical corpse. He believed that if he could destroy the flesh, the bones, and the very DNA of his victims, the British legal system would be powerless. He wasn't just a murderer. He was an engineer seeking the perfect method of erasure. The McSwan Experiment. The experiment began with William McSwan, a former employer and friend. McSwan was a wealthy man, and Haigh was a man with mounting debts and a taste for the finer things that he couldn't afford. On September 9, 1944, Haigh lured McSwan to a basement workshop he had rented at 79 Gloucester Road. The space was cramped, smelling of damp stone and machine oil. Haigh told McSwan he had a new invention to show him. As McSwan leaned over a workbench, Haigh struck him from behind with a heavy lead pipe. But the killing was only the prologue. The alchemy was the main event. Haigh had prepared a 40-gallon drum of concentrated sulfuric acid. With the cold detachment of a laboratory technician, he placed McSwan's body into the drum. He sat in the dim light of the basement, listening to the horrific hiss and bubble of the chemical reaction. Over the next 2 days, the acid performed its grim work, breaking down human tissue into a thick, black sludge. When the process was complete, Haigh tilted the drum and poured the remains of William McSwan down a storm drain in the basement floor. He watched as the last traces of his friend disappeared into the London sewers. To the world, William McSwan had simply walked out of his life. To John Haigh, he was a windfall of forged documents and emptied bank accounts. The expanding circle. The brilliance of Haigh's plan, in his own mind, was its sustainability. When McSwan's parents, Donald and Amy, began to ask questions about their son's whereabouts, Haigh didn't panic. He leaned into the lie. He told them William had gone into hiding to avoid being called up for military service. He wrote letters to them in William's handwriting, a skill he had perfected during his years as a forger. For a year, he kept the charade alive, even as he lived off William's inheritance. But eventually, the parents became too persistent. On July 2, 1945, Haigh invited them to the same basement workshop, claiming William had returned and wanted to see them. One by one, he murdered them. One by one, they were placed into the steel drums. One by one, the McSwan family was converted into a dark liquid and washed away into the dark beneath London. Haigh returned to the Onslow Court Hotel that evening, ordered a gin and tonic, and sat in the lounge, the perfect image of a contented gentleman. He had successfully erased an entire family and inherited their wealth. He was convinced he had found the loophole in God's law and man's law alike. He didn't realize that the earth has a way of holding on to secrets, and that acid, while powerful, cannot dissolve the sheer weight of suspicion. The alchemist was just beginning his career, but the fumes of his basement workshop were starting to drift toward the nostrils of Scotland Yard. By 1947, the fortune John Haigh had stolen from the McSwan family had evaporated. Haigh was a man of expensive tastes, fine wines, tailored suits, and a gambling habit that devoured cash faster than acid devoured bone. He needed a new infusion of capital, and he needed a new workspace. The basement in Gloucester Road was too small, too urban. He required privacy to perfect his grim industry. He found it in the quiet town of Crawley, Sussex. At 2 Leopold Road, tucked away behind a fence, stood a nondescript storehouse. It was a brick building, cold and damp, surrounded by high hedges. To the locals, it was just a workshop where an eccentric engineer tinkered with experimental patents. To Haigh, it was a factory floor designed for one purpose: total erasure. The Hendersons. Friends for dinner. Hay's new targets were Dr. Archibald Henderson and his wife, Rosalie. They were a wealthy, amiable couple whom Haigh had met during a property transaction. They were charmed by him. He played the piano for them at parties, discussed politics with Archibald, and complimented Rosalie on her jewelry. They saw him as a cultured gentleman, a fixer, who could help them with their investments. In February 1948, the trap was set. Haigh drove Archibald Henderson to the Crawley workshop under the pretense of showing him a new invention, a silent gas pump he claimed to be developing. The workshop was filled with the tools of Hay's trade: carboys of concentrated sulfuric acid, heavy rubber gloves, a stirrup pump, and a 40-gallon steel drum painted green. As soon as they entered the gloom of the storehouse, Haigh shot Dr. Henderson in the head with a stolen .38 Webley revolver. He didn't hesitate. There was no pulse of anger, no heated argument. It was a transaction. He left the body in the corner and returned to the hotel to fetch Rosalie. He told her that her husband had fallen ill at the workshop and was asking for her. Driven by worry, she accompanied the smiling man into his car. Upon arriving at Leopold Road, she was met with the same cold, mechanical fate as her husband. The industrial process. What followed was a scene of nightmarish labor. Haigh was a small man, and moving 2 adult bodies into the high-walled steel drums required immense physical exertion. He stripped the bodies of their valuables: Rosalie's diamond rings, Archibald's gold watch, placing them neatly into a pouch. These were the dividends of his work. He then donned a gas mask and a heavy rubber apron. He began the slow, dangerous process of pouring bucket after bucket of sulfuric acid into the drums. The fumes in the small brick building were toxic, a thick, choking fog that would have overcome a lesser man. But Haigh worked with the precision of a clockmaker. He sealed the drums and left them in the dark, allowing the chemistry to take its course over several days. During this time, Haigh didn't hide. He didn't flee. He stayed at the Onslow Court Hotel, eating full English breakfasts and chatting with the other residents about the weather. He even forged a letter from the Hendersons, claiming they had decided to emigrate to South Africa on a whim. The forgery was perfect. The explanation was plausible enough for the chaotic post-war era. The red setter and the gambling table. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of the Henderson murders was not the acid, but the dog. The couple had a beloved red setter named Pat. After dissolving the owners, Haigh didn't kill the dog. He kept it. He walked it around the grounds of the hotel, patting its head while he spent the money he had obtained by selling the Hendersons' property. He sold their house in Fulham. He sold their car. He sold their jewelry. The proceeds amounted to thousands of pounds, a fortune in 1948. But Haigh's gambling addiction was a black hole. Within a year, the money was gone. The winnings from the casinos and the dog tracks slipped through his fingers, leaving him desperate once again. The illusion of invincibility. By early 1949, John Haigh was broke. The rent at the Onslow Court Hotel was overdue. The manager was asking polite but firm questions. The pressure was mounting. But Haigh wasn't worried. He had done it twice now, wiping out entire families without a trace. He believed he was invisible. He believed he had mastered the art of the perfect crime. He sat in the lounge of the hotel, scanning the room for his next investor. His eyes landed on a wealthy, elderly widow named Mrs. Olive Durand Deacon. She was sitting alone, enjoying her tea. She was kind, opinionated, and tragically, she had an idea for a business venture: artificial fingernails. Haigh smiled. He approached her table, his charm dialed up to maximum voltage. "Mrs. Durand Deacon," he said softly, "I am an engineer. I think I can help you with that idea. I have a workshop in Crawley." The alchemist was preparing for his final performance, but this time his arrogance would lead him to make a mistake that no amount of acid could dissolve. On February 18, 1949, Mrs. Olive Durand Deacon stepped out of the Onslow Court Hotel wearing a luxurious Persian lamb coat and her best jewelry. She was 69 years old, a woman of means and dignity, and she believed she was on her way to a business meeting. John Haigh had promised her that his workshop in Crawley was fully equipped to manufacture the artificial fingernails she had dreamed of inventing. It was a cold, gray afternoon. As Haigh drove his Alvis sedan through the Sussex countryside, he wasn't thinking about fingernails. He was thinking about the overdraft at his bank and the nagging persistence of the hotel manager regarding his unpaid bill. To Haigh, Mrs. Durand Deacon wasn't a passenger. She was a solvent, a chemical solution to his financial problems. The final formula. When they arrived at the Leopold Road storehouse, the routine was terrifyingly familiar. Haigh unlocked the padlock, ushered the elderly woman inside, and while she looked around the cluttered, damp room for the manufacturing equipment, he shot her in the back of the neck. He stripped her of her Persian lamb coat and her jewelry, a diamond watch, a pearl necklace, and several rings. Then he exerted himself to push her body into the waiting 40-gallon drum. He donned his apron and mask, pouring the sulfuric acid over her remains until the drum was full. But this time, Haigh was careless. Perhaps he was tired, or perhaps his arrogance had simply made him sloppy. He left the drum to stew, locked the door, and went to a nearby tea shop to enjoy a poached egg on toast. He felt no remorse, only the satisfaction of a job completed. The fatal hubris, Haigh returned to the hotel and played the part of the concerned friend perfectly. When Mrs. Durand Deacon didn't return for dinner, another resident, Mrs. Constance Lane, became worried. Haigh, sensing an opportunity to steer the narrative, made a bold move. "We should go to the police station, Mrs. Lane," he suggested solicitously. "I will drive you myself." Haigh walked into the Chelsea police station and reported Olive Durand Deacon missing. He believed this act would place him above suspicion. Why would a murderer report the crime? However, he underestimated the instincts of a seasoned female detective named Sergeant Alexandra Lambourne. She found Haig's manner too slick, his eyes too cold. She ran a background check. The teletype machine spat out the truth. George Haigh was not a patent engineer. He was a convicted thief and fraudster with a history of crimes involving forgery. The investigation was immediately escalated. Detective Inspector Simeon Heslop took charge. He didn't look for a missing woman. He looked at the man who had reported her. The excavation of horror. On February 26th, police forced their way into the workshop on Leopold Road. Inside, they found a scene that looked more like a slaughterhouse than a laboratory. There were carboys of acid, a rubber apron stained with chemical burns, a gas mask, and a .38 caliber Webley revolver hidden in a hat box. They also found a dry cleaner's receipt for a Persian lamb coat. But the drums were empty. Haigh had already tipped the sludge out onto the ruble in the backyard. He was confident. No body, no crime, he whispered to himself. He was wrong. Professor Keith Simpson, the Home Office pathologist, was called to the scene. He looked at the patch of oily, black sludge in the yard. It looked like industrial waste to the untrained eye. But Simpson crouched down and began to sift through the muck with a trowel. Within minutes, he found something. A small, round, cherry-red object. It was a pebble, or so it seemed. But upon closer inspection, it was revealed to be a human gallstone. Gallstones are covered in fat, which protects them from acid. The search intensified. Sifting through hundreds of pounds of sludge, the team found 28 pounds of human body fat, which acid dissolves very slowly. Part of a left foot, 18 fragments of human bone, the handle of a red plastic handbag, and the smoking gun, a set of upper and lower acrylic dentures. Haigh had not realized that while sulfuric acid dissolves tissue and bone, it does not dissolve acrylic resin. Mrs. Durand Deacon's false teeth were intact. They were easily identified by her dentist. The confession of a madman. Haigh was arrested at the Onslow Court Hotel. At first, he was calm, even smug. But as the police questioned him, his facade began to crack. Not with fear, but with a bizarre desire for notoriety. He looked at Inspector Heslop and asked a question that chilled the room. "Tell me, Frankli, are the chances of being released from Broadmoor, a psychiatric hospital, better than being hanged?" Without waiting for an answer, he leaned forward and said, "I've destroyed her with acid. You will find the sludge that remains at Leopold Road. Every trace has gone. How can you prove murder if there is no body?" He smiled, genuinely believing he had stumped them. "I have made a study of the law," he boasted. "No corpus delicti." Inspector Heslop looked at him grimly. "We found the teeth, Mr. Haigh, and the gallstones. The body is there. It's just in pieces." The color drained from the alchemist's face. The equation had failed. The perfect crime was nothing more than a messy, brutal murder, and the engineer was about to face the one thing he couldn't dissolve, the hangman's noose. As George Haigh sat in his cell at Brixton Prison, the reality of his situation began to solidify like the sludge in his backyard. The police had the dentures. They had the gallstones. The corpus delicti loophole had been a myth all along. Faced with undeniable physical evidence, Haigh did what he always did. He reinvented himself. If he couldn't be the innocent man, he would be the monster. He would be a creature so deranged that the law could not hang him, but only pity him. The vampire defense. Haigh began to weave a grotesque tapestry of lies to the court psychiatrists. He claimed that he hadn't killed for money. He claimed he had killed for blood. "I have been haunted by dreams of bleeding trees since I was a boy," he told them, his voice calm and melodic. He described a red fog that would descend upon him, a compulsion driven by biblical nightmares. He told the doctors that after shooting his victims, he had made an incision in their necks and caught a cup full of their blood to drink before dissolving their bodies. The press went wild. The headlines screamed, "The Vampire Killer." Haigh was delighted. He asked the prison guards if his story was making the front page. He was playing the role of the madman, with the same attention to detail he had used to forge signatures. His goal was simple, a verdict of guilty but insane, which would send him to Broadmoor Hospital for the criminally insane, a place he viewed as a comfortable retirement home compared to the gallows. The trial at Lewis Assizes. The trial began on July 18, 1949, in the historic town of Lewis. The courtroom was packed. Haigh sat in the dock, impeccably dressed, looking more like a bored bank manager than a serial killer. The defense, led by Sir David Maxwell Fyfe, leaned heavily into the insanity plea. They called psychiatrists to testify about Haigh's paranoia and his blood fetish, but the Attorney General, Sir Hartley Shawcross, dismantled the vampire myth with a single, brutal weapon: logic. He pointed out the timeline. Haigh didn't kill in a frenzy. He planned. He bought the acid days in advance. He prepared the drums. And most damning of all, he immediately sold the victim's possessions to pay off his gambling debts. "Is it a coincidence," Shawcross asked the jury, "that the red fog only descended when Mr. Haigh's bank account was empty?" The drinking blood story was exposed for what it was, a desperate fabrication. Vampires don't forge deeds. Vampires don't haggle over the price of a second-hand car. Con men do. 15 minutes to doom. The jury was not charmed. They were not confused. They saw a cold, calculating narcissist who had liquidated 6 human beings and confessed to 3 others, simply to maintain a lifestyle he couldn't afford. It took them only 15 minutes to reach a verdict. Guilty. Mr. Justice Humphreys placed the black cap atop his wig. Haigh stood impassively, his hands clasped behind his back, as the sentence of death was pronounced. He didn't flinch. He didn't scream. He simply nodded, as if accepting the terms of a business deal that had gone sour. The last vanity. In the weeks before his execution, Haigh's vanity remained his only companion. He wrote letters complaining about the prison food, but his biggest concern was his legacy. He wrote to Madame Tussauds, the famous wax museum in London, requesting that his wax figure be dressed in his own clothes. "My green suit," he specified, "and make sure the socks are silk." He wanted to be immortalized. He wanted to be a star. On the morning of August 10th, 1949, the famous hangman Albert Pierre Point entered the execution chamber at Wandsworth Prison. Haigh was waiting. He was calm. He even offered a polite greeting. Pierre Point, a man of few words and supreme efficiency, placed the white hood over Haigh's head. The alchemist stood on the trapdoor. The lever was pulled. George Haigh dropped 6 feet. The rope snapped tight. The man who had dissolved others into nothingness was finally extinguished. The residue. The wax figure was indeed made, and it stood in the Chamber of Horrors for decades, staring out at tourists with glass eyes. But the true legacy of the acid bath murderer wasn't his wax effigy. It was the plastic dentures and the gallstones, the stubborn, indestructible pieces of humanity that refused to be erased. Haigh proved that you can dissolve flesh, you can dissolve bone, but you cannot dissolve the truth. It always settles at the bottom.